I originally tried to upload this video, but it got taken down due to copyright, which makes sense, I suppose. To try and still make my video work, I've taken the trailers for each film for the clips. This means it doesn't match what I'm saying, but it still makes sense. Some of the jokes have also been taken out because of this, but I think it's okay. Anyway, the Taken trilogy is incredible if we just The films follow Brian and his many times he and his family are kidnapped. The first film starts with Kim, Brian's daughter's birthday party. It is immediately apparent that Brian's ex-wife hates him. Her new husband also buys Kim a horse, which she's overly excited for because she looks like she's at least 20. Brian soon gets a job protecting a pop star, but as they're leaving the stage, they get ambushed by a knife attacker. Brian makes light work of the attacker. As a thanks, the pop star offers to teach Brian's daughter Kim how to sing if she's good. The next day, Brian and Kim plan to meet up so Brian can surprise her with the news, but Lenore, his ex-wife, is there, and they spring a trip to Paris on him. Kim has planned a trip to Paris, but needs Brian's permission to go. He's reluctant at first, but eventually gives in. At the airport, Brian finds a map showing Kim is actually going to travel all over Europe following a band. He realizes this because Kim packed like a child. When Kim and her friend arrive at Paris, they meet an overly friendly man who offers to share a taxi with them. Having the intelligence of a 12-year-old, they obviously agree to this. Later, when Kim is at her house, she phones Brian, but at that moment, some burglars break in and kidnap her friend. Brian tells Kim she will also be taken, but when she is, make sure she describes them as best she can. This gives Brian a rough idea of what the kidnappers will look like. One of the kidnappers then pick up the phone that Brian is on, leading to one of the most famous lines in cinema history.
I will look for you. I will find you. And I will kill you.
Brian meets with one of his old friends to try and learn about the kidnappers. It turns out it's a gang, and he has 96 hours to find Kim or she'll be sold into human trafficking and never be found again. This leads Brian to immediately fly to Paris. At the airport, Brian immediately runs into the same man who shared a taxi with Kim. He tries to question him, but before he can, he gets hit by a lorry trying to escape. One of Brian's other friends, called Jean, meets with Brian in Paris. He tells him about the human trafficking gang. Brian finds out they're set up in a construction site nearby, so that night he goes to try and retrieve his daughter. When Brian gets there, he finds his daughter's jacket, but it's with another girl. He takes this girl to help him and kills the gang members. When she wakes up, she tells Brian that she only remembers a red door and the street name. Brian finds this door and sneaks in, posing as someone who owns the building, trying to raise their rent. He notices the tattoos that Kim described and the voice from the man on the phone. This confirms it's the right group, so he kills them all except one. He then searches the rest of the house to see if he can find his daughter, but he only finds random people, who he obviously doesn't save. He straps the man he kidnapped onto an electric chair. He tortures the man into revealing where Kim will be sold. He then leaves the chair on for the man to die as he leaves. I hope this doesn't come up in a future film. There's then quite a confusing bit with Jean which I don't understand, so I won't go through. The main part of this scene though is that Brian gets information off Jean to know where the auction's happening. He sneaks into the auction and forces one of the people to buy his daughter. He's then captured, but by the very next scene he escapes. Kim is then put on the buyer's boat, so Brian has to catch the boat and jump on, which he does. He then goes around the boat, killing all of the guards and eventually saving his daughter. The film ends with Kim meeting the singer from the very beginning. Despite my poor attempts to explain this film, it is actually quite good. I wonder if the other films can keep this up. Taken 2 begins with a funeral for all of the dead gang members Brian killed in the last film. We're introduced to Murad, the leader. Brian is trying to teach Kim how to drive, but she isn't turning up to the test because she's spending time with her boyfriend. This means Brian goes to visit them to take her away. Brian soon gets the job in Istanbul, but his family join him once he's done. Brian is surprised by this, but excited. They all start spending time together, but they're soon spotted by a gang member. Brian and Lenore then spend some time together. Despite hating each other in the last film, they're now fine with each other. The power of being off-screen. Brian realizes they're being followed by the gang members, so tells Lenore to run. He then fights two men in possibly what is the worst fight scene I've ever seen. If the shaky camera, weird zooms, and absurd cuts didn't make you feel dizzy, nothing will. Brian and Lenore are then captured, so Brian phones Kim, which the gang members has let him do. He tells her that they've been captured and that she needs to hide. Brian and Lenore are then taken. Brian then wakes up in a room he's tied up, but pulls out a mysterious phone he had hidden in his sock, which didn't break during the fight, and it wasn't found by the gang members when they were tying him up. Brian then phones Kim to tell her what's going on. Kim tries to help, so Brian tells her to throw a grenade. This way they can roughly find where he is, which they do. Brian is then beaten by Murad, who tells him that the person he tortured in the last film was his son. Murad then cuts Lenore's neck, giving her 30 minutes until she dies. Murad then leaves the room, allowing Brian to obviously escape.
Wait, aren't you even gonna watch them? They could get away.
No. I'm going to leave them alone and not actually witness them dying. I'm just gonna assume it all went to plan. What?
Kim then finds the building that Brian is in. She drops a gun down the chimney for him. This allows him to kill all of the gang members and escape, leaving Lenore. Brian goes back to save Lenore, but when he does, she gets taken. This means he has to go to a different building and kill the guards there to save her. In the process, Murad is killed. The film ends with Kim passing her driving test. This film wasn't quite as good as the original, but if you can look past the badly edited fight scenes, you might enjoy it. Film 3 begins with Ole, a Russian gangster, forcing someone to open a safe. Once it's open, he realizes it's empty. This means he kills the person. Meanwhile, Kim realizes that she's pregnant. On her birthday, Brian oddly brings her a giant stuffed animal. I think I explained that badly, but Brian doesn't know that he's pregnant. Lenore is upset with her new husband, so later she visits Brian at his house. The new husband is upset that Lenore spends so much time with Brian. The next day, Lenore wants to visit Brian, so he goes out to buy some hot bagels. When he gets back, he finds that Lenore is dead on his bed. The husband did it. The police somehow immediately turn up inside of the room and try and arrest him, but Brian fights them off and runs. After a long and poorly edited escape scene, he finds a random hole in someone's garage which leads to the sewers. I don't know how he found that, but more importantly, wouldn't having a hole in your garage leading straight to the sewers make your house stink? Brian then finds a phone to phone Kim. He tells her about Lenore's death and how he's being framed for it. The husband did it. Detective Frank then finds the hole that Brian escaped down. Is that Saul Guerrero? Frank then questions the husband, who's called Stuart, but Kim insists that Brian is innocent. The husband did it. Brian sneaks into Lenore's car to try and find a GPS thing. It shows that she went to an obscure petrol station, which I don't think is ever explained why she was there. When Brian goes to the petrol station, he finds CCTV camera footage, which shows that Lenore was kidnapped. The police arrive and arrest Brian at the petrol station, but he obviously escapes, leading to a GTA-style car chase. Brian then meets with Kim in the bathroom at her school. He tries to explain to Kim what's happened, but the police arrive, so he has to escape. Brian then kidnaps Stuart and waterboards him for information. He reveals that he owes Ole money. This leads Brian to assume that Ole was the killer of Lenore. The husband did it. Brian plans to attack Ole, but there's an overly complicated lift system in the way. He still relatively easily breaks in, and kills all of the guards. Ole and Brian then get into a long fight. Brian obviously wins, which leads to Ole revealing that Stuart hired him to kill Lenore. Yes, obvious plot point predicted. Whilst Brian is inside, Stuart takes Kim and drives to the airport. Brian has to follow them. At the airport, Stuart gets Kim into a plane, and as it's taking off, Brian crashes his car into it, making them crash. Brian then shoots Stuart, but lets him live, letting him get arrested. This means Brian is free. The series ends with Brian and Kim on the pier. This film could have really been left out of the trilogy and there wouldn't have been very much of a difference. I wonder why it was made.
Money, 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 must be funny.
It's really predictable and quite boring, but if you want to see a GTA film, it might be for you. Anyway, I've tried to fix the trilogy by making my own version. It's going to follow on from the first film, and I'm going to try and stick to as close to the original as I can. This means that Taken 2 will also start with the same funeral, and Moran being upset. Meanwhile, Kim's music career didn't quite work out, and Brian gets a job in Istanbul. He takes Kim to try and make her feel better. Once they get there, they are again seen by a gang member, meaning Madan knows where they are. In the meantime, Brian and Kim spend some time together and enjoy the beauty of Istanbul. Istanbul, a place of fun, adventure, and other long words. Whilst there, why not enjoy some palaces and boats? Sorry, I saw that joke on Clank on Earth and wanted to try it. Anyway, back to Taken. After a montage of the two spending time together, the gang arrive at Brian's hotel. By the time Brian realizes, Kim has been kidnapped and he can see her being thrown into a van through a window. Not seeing many options, ignore the last film, Brian gives himself up to try and rescue Kim. Brian is then beaten. As Brian wakes up, he sees Kim tied up and she's trying to escape. Brian would look up to see both of his hands tied to a pipe. Madan then would walk in and tell Brian about all the people he killed in the last film, and the families he's ruined. Brian's face would sink as he realizes the pain that he's caused. Madan then would conveniently reveal to Brian that his son was the person that he strapped to the electric chair in the last film.
What a coincidence.
As revenge, and I only did this because I have to link it to the first film, Madan would set Kim up in an electric chair. She is then given the dead man's switch for the chair. Brian is then told if she lets go, she dies. Madan then would leave the room, but he would leave a gang member just in case. For the rest of the day, Brian and Kim sit in fear, trying not to drop the switch. At night time, Kim begins to fall asleep, so Brian has to yell to keep her awake. By the next morning, they're both tired and Kim's grip is loose. Brian would then realise that the guard has passed out. He would jump to his feet and break the bars holding him up. He would then jump at the guard and strangle him. He would fall backwards, realising he's just killed another person. He would look back up at his daughter and see that she's still tied up though. He would then find a key on the guard which unlocks his handcuffs but doesn't work on Kim's. Kim would begin to cry as she's still stuck. Brian would look around the room and find some duct tape to tape around her hand and the switch to make sure she can't let go. Brian would then leave the room to try and find a key to save her. He would first find a room filled with guards, so he obviously sneaks past that one. Brian would then bump into Madan. Madan immediately shoots Brian, making him fall over. Madan would then walk over Brian. Brian would lunge up at Madan and grab the gun, pointing it at his head, but unable to pull the trigger. His hand would begin to shake, and Brian would drop the gun. Madan would then grab the gun as Brian falls to his knees. Brian would look back at his daughter and realise that she's still tied up. Because of this, he would jump up at Madan and beat him out of consciousness. He would make sure not to kill him, though. By this point, Brian is exhausted and he has 2 bullets in him. He's close to death. He finds Kim's key on Madan. He goes over to her and unties her. The noise created by the fight alerted the guards in the next room over, so they charge into the room that Brian and Kim are now in. They aim guns at Brian and Kim, but Brian quickly pushes Kim out of a perfectly placed window.
What a coincidence.
Immediately opened fire on Brian, killing him, in a scene similar to John's death in Red Dead Redemption. The film would end with Kim and Lenore at Brian's funeral as they leave his grave. Anyway, that's the version I came up with. There was nothing particularly wrong with Taken 2, but it did set up too much. For instance, Brian having to pay for the consequences in the first film. There was also the weird bit where he was teaching Kim what to do, but these bits never went anywhere. This meant I thought I'd fix it, with Brian having to pay for his consequences. It's not too different to the original, but I thought I'd just change it a little bit. You may have noticed I accidentally missed the third film, but rest assured, it wasn't an accident. The sole reason I killed Brian was that there was no possibility of a third film. I think my version is better, but the ending seems a bit rushed, so, it's not perfect. Anyway, goodbye!